The high interest rate environment continues to rattle some sectors, but one sector that is feeling the pinch the most is the property sector. According to the latest FNB House Price Index, growth has slowed to 0.8% year-on-year in August, down from 1.2% in July. The index continues to show declining levels of demand, while supply of properties for sale was relatively stable in August. FNB also says the feedback from their latest estate agent survey suggests that two-thirds, at least 67% of listed properties now take 3 months or more to sell. That is up from 56% in the second quarter of 2023. To talk a little about this, we are joined by Ipeleng Mkhari, a property guru and, of course, the CEO at Motseng Investment Holdings. Ipeleng, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your time as well. I want to start here before we get into the news. Motseng Investment Holdings Group is celebrating a 25-year journey. Let's talk about that and what this journey has entailed as an all-female, all-black-led group, and what the next 25 years looks like.
Thank you so much, Polani. It's a real pleasure to be here with you as well, and thank you to your viewers as well. Indeed, we are delighted and ecstatic about our 25-year journey. We've been celebrating since last week, Sunday, and we turned 25 on the 18th of September. It's been a surreal, challenging, very inspiring, rewarding, but also, a journey where we've learned a lot. We have been on a learning journey for 25 years, I would say. And that's not going to stop for us at Motseng. We're an organization that started in the late 90s, very, very soon after the new democracy in our country came about. And I think we started with a lot of gusto, Polani. We started with a lot of energy. We were much younger then, and we were individuals who believed in a country that had so much hope. We believed in the opportunity for young people to build on what really the new democracy brought about, which was a new South Africa, a place where you belonged, and you could actually create or at least embark on building your own destiny. And that's exactly what we did. We were following in the steps of organizations like Jonic, like NAIL, that we would see around us. We were enthralled by their success, but we wanted to be part of it. And an interesting matter that many people may not know, an interesting fact, is that when we started, in fact, the first business was a little CCTV business in 97. But when Motseng was born, we started off as Motseng Youth Investment in Holdings. And we later dropped the youth and just became Motseng Investment Holdings. So I think what we see today as an organization is that the 25-year journey has shown us a lot. We have started off in the services sector, providing services into property like CCTV, electronic security solutions. And then when we began to delve deeper into the space, we realized, in fact, in about 2000, that property and the opportunity within the sector offered so much more than we had ever envisioned or even known. And I think we were the type of entrepreneurs who were very inquiring. Our minds wanted to know more. And whilst we hadn't studied property studies per se or engineering per se, we were hungry to learn. And that's exactly what we did. And we've built this business over the last 25 years on the pillars, really, in the first decade of understanding property management, of managing other people's properties. And we were very blessed in that time to be able to start very slowly to acquire our own properties off our very small balance sheet. I'm very proud to say that we have grown the business 25 years later. We regard ourselves very much as a property business, but we're expanding. And what we see ourselves becoming is a property and infrastructure group. And that is really led by the changes that we've seen in our environment, in our sector. It's led by the market conditions that we're operating in. And I think it's also led by essentially the environment within South Africa, and if you can really say it, possibly even globally, we're seeing massive shifts and a real integration now where property players in South Africa certainly becoming far more focused on the elements within infrastructure.
A real good journey it has been, 25 years indeed. But still, Ipeleng, today, 25 years later, there aren't so many similar companies such as yourselves. I'm sure when you look around, there are peers that are there, but not a lot. What has been the biggest lesson as a black female in the property sector? Your number one lesson since starting 25 years ago?
I think, one of the greatest lessons for me has been staying on course, staying focused in a particular area, really honing our skills in that area, and not rushing to expand the business or diversify the business too quickly. That has led us really to become experts or to become specialists within a specific industry. And I think that once we got to a point where we were then able to diversify based on the time frame that we had spent and the capabilities that we had developed, it became easier to build on that foundation. It became easier for us to slightly diversify into telecoms, to look at public-private partnerships. It has been very interesting looking at that and even looking at strategic investments, which are not quite necessarily focused on an asset or asset management. And even recently, our specific focus on making sure that when we look at an asset at Motseng, we see an asset as essentially any type of asset that has got a long-term lease or a long-term project finance kind of capability. And what we see in that is the opportunity to be able to potentially co-own, asset manage, and then operate, those particular assets. And so, even renewable assets, when we look at alternative energy, have become a real source of growth and focus for us as a business. You might ask us, what our peers and our peer groups look like. What we're seeing within the sector is that there is a lot of this diversification taking place. Certainly not as easy for everybody to do. And I think what has put us in good stead over the last 25 years has really been making sure that as we understand the property value chain, that we've moved up that value chain steadily. So when we started, we were just a service provider into the industry. We then decided that we're going to start owning assets. Now, just the movement from managing assets to owning assets is quite a big step to take. But we have always reinvested our money in the business. We've always taken the time to say, well, in fact, the money needs to go back into the company in order for us to grow this business and make it slightly bigger each year. And I think really what has helped us, as I've said, is becoming skilled in this value chain and moving from the bottom feeders all the way, hopefully, to becoming a little bit higher up the value chain. And we see the opportunity in repeating that story along different verticals that are similar in terms of the asset classes.
Ipeleng, let's come back to some of the property news. On the back, especially on the back of the MPC announcement yesterday, the hawkish hold on interest rates, would you say, as a person who has so many decades in the property space, is it still a buyer's market today, or are those days gone with the low rates that came with the COVID-19 pandemic?
The COVID-19 pandemic has been quite a challenge for the property sector because, as you said, we've seen a lot of rental reversions taking place across the sector, across the board, particularly in the commercial accommodation sector, office sector. And I think that what has really happened is that hasn't necessarily become better because the energy impact or the crisis that we're sitting in has just worsened the conditions for property owners. So, first of all, we will say, I think, as the property sector certainly will say as Motseng, that, the MPC announcement was a positive announcement for us because naturally for us, any interest rate hikes, given the large levels of debt that need to be raised for property assets or acquiring assets, would mean that, our debt just increases. So it's been good to see that being held. But I think that certainly the industry is is in a very difficult spot. You know, we are not necessarily seeing huge assets being bought. In fact, we're seeing massive, there's a lot of supply in the market in terms of, you know, lots of landlords selling assets and obviously trying to liquidate their assets, trying to turn these things into some kind of, at least some cash for themselves. And it's a difficult time, though, you know, for landlords to actually receive or achieve the types of yields that they would have anticipated or expected when they might have bought those assets a couple of years ago. So a tough market, tough time, and certainly I think for us, we are foreseeing certainly into the short and medium term that, you know, the increased crisis, the energy crisis, is just placing more and more pressure, not only on the tenant, but equally on landlords.
The volatile state of the economy, Ipeleng, has no doubt affected investment classes such as property. What are some of the headwinds still plaguing the sector and tailwinds that investors can still get excited about in this volatile state and environment?
Look, I think as I've just said, you know, it is a crisis of serious proportions because you can imagine that whilst we have a depth in the listed sector where you have, you know, asset owners who potentially are able to invest in appropriate alternative energy sources to future-proof their assets, it is not every asset owner that is able to do that at a large scale. And so what we're seeing really in these headwinds is that the energy crisis is by far the largest crisis and by far the largest issue, but also a great opportunity. And maybe when you start talking about tailwinds and opportunities, you start to see how the property industry is really trying to future-proof their assets, but also to stay alive in this particular sector. Interestingly, you know, we've just come from the SAPOA conference, South African Property Owners Annual Conference, and the number one conversation piece was undoubtedly energy. What do we do around these particular issues and these headwinds that we're seeing? I think there's some interesting aspects coming out in the market, particularly in allowing landlords to better understand how to be agile, how to make sure that their assets actually are sustainable assets, that they're not relying entirely on the grid. And I think what was quite interesting that came out was some of the Eskom demand-side management plans that were shown for a couple of years, which are, I suppose, balancing the supply-side focus. You know, everyone is talking about renewable energy and what you can put onto your rooftops. And so what we're seeing is potentially opportunities to say to landlords, well, in fact, how do you actually manage efficiency of your building long before you decide to go and invest in you know, a rooftop solution, for instance, or additional battery storage. So there's a lot that is really facing the industry. And I think what is important here to say is that it's not just affecting the landlords. It's affecting our tenants are under immense pressure, as you can imagine, because they are simply needing to be in spaces where, you know, where essentially the rental that they're paying for and the costs that are associated with it are actually deemed to be, you know, accretive for them. And so tenants are under immense pressure. And so this relationship between, you know, landlords and tenants is a challenge. And I think it's quite difficult to offset these costs entirely, but that's exactly what the industry is trying to do.
Ipeleng Mkhari is the CEO at Motseng Investment Holdings. Once again, congratulations on celebrating 25 years in the business. And